Hello, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon session, The Power of Regular Performance Conversations. I'm Andy Roberts, I'm CEO at Weekly10, and today I've got Chris Shenton, who heads up our people science team with us today to talk over how you can really power up performance conversations and what you might have in terms of performance reviews in your teams. Before we get started, just a few bits of housekeeping. First of all, today's session will be recorded, so you will receive an email from the team within the next 24 hours or so to your registered email with a recording of the session, and of course you can pass that on to any of your team members. And we are running a Q&A at the back end of the talk today. So if you do have any questions, you'll find a Q&A option within your webinar panel. You can drop questions in at any time during the session, or you can wait until the end of the session, and we'll look to answer those questions in the last 5 or 10 minutes or so in the session itself. So the agenda for today, we will be going through a bit of background really as to why traditional performance reviews will never quite be enough to get us where we want to be as progressive organizations. So Chris is going to give us a little bit of insight into some of the challenges that traditional approaches to performance management encounter. He'll then talk a little bit more about really a more dynamic approach, a more continuous approach that at Weekly10 we call performance conversations. And Chris will be talking about why you should, if you're not already, move to something which is a little bit more supportive of continuous conversation. I'll then jump in and show you around the elements of the Weekly10 platform, particularly the conversations element of the platform within Weekly10, to show you how you can actually get started empowering up and creating those conversations. So outside of the standard check-in, how Weekly10 can support those ongoing conversations. And then finally, we'll have our Q&A at the end, and as I said, just drop some questions in as we go, or wait until the end of the session, and we'll look to answer those at the end of the session. So with that, I will pass over to Chris Shenton, and Chris is going to get us started with a look at why performance reviews will never be enough.
Cheers, Andy, and depending on where you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So as Andy says, I'm going to take you through a little bit of a theory now, and we're going to start with this relatively simple sounding question: why performance reviews will never be enough. Now, you know this already, but performance reviews rarely work in the way that we really want them to. They're not necessarily always the best tool for development, and they're not necessarily always the best tool for goal setting and goal tracking, but they are extremely popular. You know, in fact, according to a 2021 article in Forbes magazine, somewhere around about 68% of businesses are still using a traditional performance review as their primary performance management tool. And when I say traditional performance review, just so we're all on the same page, what I'm really talking about are those annual, biannual, if you're lucky, sit downs with a manager where past performance is reviewed and possibly some sort of goal or target setting action is taken for the next sort of 6 to 12 months, and then very little in between. Now, you're all Weekly10 customers, so you're very much bought into the idea, hopefully, of feedback being frequent. But depending on what level of platform you're using, whether you're a Connect or Connect Squared user versus a Momentum user, and depending on just how much you've explored the platform so far, it might be that actually the check-in is there for you and doing what it needs to do, but there could be more that we could be doing. So that's what we're going to sort of look at today. So like I said, we know that performance reviews generally don't work very well. Now, why is that? Well, one reason is around the expectations of employees. The global workforce is an ever-evolving beast. Very rarely do the wants, the needs, the desires of our people stay static for very long. And what we can see here, and I should caveat this by saying that all the data you're going to see now comes from one of 4 sources, really. So it's either the CIPD here in the UK, SHRM over in the States, Gallup or Gartner. And what we can see from these stats, particularly the first 3 stats, is that there is always a desire for more. There's a desire for more frequent feedback. So we can see 92% of employees want feedback at least a year. 73% say they want performance feedback at least monthly. And then when we look at generational differences, we can see that our Gen Z cohort, who are sort of, ever growing in terms of our workplaces at the moment, these are the guys who are up to about 22 years of age or there or thereabouts. They really want to see weekly performance feedback in a way that we've never really seen before. Over half of that cohort are keen to get performance data out of their managers, out of their peers once a week if possible. And you add all this up and what you see is 83% of employees want more feedback than they're getting right now. Now, I could have taken any stats to finish off this slide, but I found this one really interesting. This comes from work done by SHRM in partnership with a university over in the States. And in this research piece, they found that about 37% of employees that were interviewed as part of this research openly admitted to saying, you know what, I'm not working at my best at the moment. I'm not giving my all. But if I had more feedback and I had more recognition, then perhaps that would change. So not only, is it a clear issue, but even our people are aware that, they're not getting what they need and it's impacting their own performance. And then we move on to the effectiveness of a traditional review. At the start of me talking, I said, we know they don't work, but why aren't they working? Well, again, as you can see here, sort of a lot of our employees understand that this thing should be all about developing me as an employee, but actually a performance review is largely ineffective. I worry about it while I'm in that meeting and why that meeting's coming up, but more often than not, after it's done, there's not a lot of follow-up. And 95% of HR leaders agree, they don't really see a big payoff when it comes to performance reviews. Again, looking at generational differences, this is a really interesting finding. 47% of millennial employees have reported feeling really negative after a review. They feel like they can't do anything. They feel abject failures, essentially, and that is definitely not what we want our people to feel after they've gone through any sort of performance management activity. And although it doesn't mean necessarily that people are leaving jobs, a similar piece of research found that actually nearly a third of employees, after having a bad or negative performance review, actually started a new job search. Now, if we look at these four things in isolation outside of a world of work, let's say somebody's partaking in a behavior where it's not really helping them as an individual. Experts are telling them this isn't really useful to you. People are feeling really negative when they partake in that behavior, and actually it's leading them to question the ways in which they live and the big choices they've made about their lives. We'd probably say that they're sort of partaking in some sort of destructive behavior. But in the world of work, we call it performance review, and 70% of us are using them all the time. So that's a really interesting sort of illustration of maybe there is something going wrong here. And then finally, we come to the cost of a traditional review. So, okay, sometimes we look at solutions in our lives which might not necessarily be the most effective, but they're a good cost, they're a good price. They're cheap and easy and they'll do for now. Well, we just know that's not quite true either about traditional performance reviews. So the CEB, in a big piece of research a couple of years ago, you will have seen this, I'm sure, found that on average, if you're a 10,000 employee company, it's probably costing you somewhere around about $35 million per year to run those reviews. That's $3,500 per person. Now, if your CEO or CFO came to you tomorrow and said, right, here's $3,500 per person to go out and improve us as a business, our culture, whatever it might be, you could probably come up with something more innovative and effective than a performance review. So, okay, it costs a lot, but maybe it's easy to run. Well, no, 210 hours every year is what managers spend on performance review activities, 40 hours per year if you're an employee. So it's not only a money sink, it's a time sink too. And then there's the hidden costs. So around about a fifth of employees have openly admitted to taking a day off work, pulling a sickie, avoiding work for one way or another in order to not have to partake in a review. So you're losing productivity there as well. So the costs are huge, the benefits aren't great, and employees aren't really after them. So it makes sense. And you might sit here and think, well, okay, you're telling us to scrap reviews, but we're not. We're telling you to reframe them. We can see benefits when it comes to reviews. My first statistic that we went through today, 77% of employees find them ineffective. Well, that means somewhere around about 23% of employees find them effective. So they're working for some people. Having a dedicated time to sit down in the diary and have a discussion around, what people have been up to and where they're moving, that's really beneficial. The best conversations happen face-to-face or certainly digitally face-to-face. We're not saying get rid of them completely. We're saying just rethink them and reframe them. And that takes us on to performance conversations. So what is a performance conversation? Well, how do we reframe a review? What do we think of when we talk about reviews? If we think in terms of conversations, we understand at a human level what a conversation is. It's very easy to understand. What is a review? Well, usually there's something critical, often to be feared before we know otherwise. If we take ourselves out of the world of work for a minute and think about reviews, let's say in the world of restaurants or theatres, the people that give those reviews are critics. and it leads to everybody walking on eggshells and being really uncomfortable when that critic is around. Now, through something called the halo effect, a psychological idea called the halo effect, the way we think about something in one area of the world or our lives often bleeds through into the others. And that's what we see with performance reviews largely. People think, well, it's going to be critical. It's something I should fear. It's something I need to sort of step around very carefully and be on guard against. And that's not how we want people to feel. We'd much rather have our people think of these things as conversations, because they feel much more human, much more normal. Now, if we look at how we compare reviews and conversations, what we can see here on the left-hand side, we can see a list of the classic critical points around reviews, the criticisms of them. Usually they're untimely, they're quite often one way, with the manager talking to or at the employee. As I said before, critical, cost and high effort, we've already seen. Very often formulaic. It's we're going to sit down at this time, we've got to move through steps A, B, and C, and there's often, not always, often though, not necessarily at the fault of the manager, little room for sort of flexibility around that. Often very much past focused, as opposed to if we're trying to develop people, there's not too much point in spending too long looking at the past. Subjective, and very often based on outdated goals. The best example of this is obviously we've all just gone through 2.5 years, 3 years of mayhem when it comes to the global pandemic, and we all know that all of a sudden during that pandemic our goals were shifting left, right and centre all the time, and if they're not being reviewed regularly, our people are probably still working towards outdated goals. If we flip that on its head though, conversations, I'm not going to go through all these, but we can see where reviews are untimely, conversations just happen when they're needed. We have them when we need a conversation. They're frequent. They're no longer one way. Conversations by default are a two-way thing. They're about being human, and that's what a good review should be. It should be a good discussion. It should be a two-way street. They're constructive, yet still honest, but it's less about being critical and it's about finding ways forward. There's all sorts of other benefits and ways that we can reshape how our connotations and our preconceptions around reviews, just simply by rebranding them to be conversations and utilizing this as a framework and a way of thinking moving forwards. Now, it's important to understand that I'm talking a lot here about traditional reviews, but conversations aren't just reviews. It's much more than that. So what we have on screen here, this is a Weekly10 product wheel, essentially. This is sort of, you're getting a look behind the curtain here in terms of how we look and talk about our product here at Weekly10. So in the central circle here, we have feedback, goals and OKRs and recognition. And that's kind of the heart of what we do. And realistically, it's what we call essentially our data collection element. The outer circle, where it talks about analytics and other bits and pieces, that's our data analysis element. But in the middle, we have our conversations element, our circle. So there you can see reviews, but there's also things like 360 feedback, one-to-ones. It also incorporates things like probation reviews, exit interviews, project evaluations. Essentially, any one-to-one or even group in some contexts, sit downs that you have with your people to chat about, what's happened previously, where are we at now, and where are we moving forward. All of those should be thought of as conversations, and that sort of framework about keeping things sort of two-way, open, honest should be applied to those. Now, I'm telling you it should be done. Why should it be done? Well, there's lots of data out there. And again, I could have picked all sorts of numbers here, but there's lots of data that shows that a more continuous, more conversational approach to performance management has massive benefits, not just for your people, but also you as a business. So first of all, HR professionals who utilize these sort of frameworks and techniques see a massive benefit. You see that the picture you get of performance in and around your business is far more accurate than you get from a review. Equally, regular feedback and performance-related feedback makes employees far more likely to be engaged in the work they're doing. Why? Because it reinforces purpose and gives people more autonomy and more direction. So the more frequently we're helping and checking in and saying, right, where are we at, guys? How do we need to pivot or change? It just helps us become more engaged. A more frequent approach as well. Practice makes perfect here. The more frequently we practice something, the less likely we are to suffer from anxiety or stress. So that 22% statistic of people pulling sickies, that goes down. You are going to see more people turning up for these conversations. And really interestingly, this is a good one, is companies that have these ongoing real-time performance management conversations register far better talent acquisition. So it helps you not only retain your top people, but retain them for longer too. And then last bit from me really is when it comes to looking at your reviews now and how do we reframe them? How do we get them more towards this conversation sort of style? These are our 5 starting tips. So 1, make them more collaborative. So by that I mean send out an agenda, allow the employee to impact as much or as little as they need to on that agenda. And then during the sit down, make sure that both parties have the chance to talk and express ideas, experiences, concerns, whatever it might be. A good conversation should be a 50-50 split at the minimum, and actually sometimes allow the employee even more talking time than that. Make them reflective and evidence-based. So we don't want you to not look back at all. Absolutely, there is benefit in looking at recent performance and understanding hurdles, challenges, and how you're going to overcome them moving forward. Utilize the evidence though as well. It's no good just going, this is how I remember it. As far as I can remember, to the best of my knowledge, throughout the year, you guys are your Weekly10 customers, so you're hopefully doing this already with your check-ins, but you can record interesting and useful bits of feedback, key pieces of information. If you're utilizing goals or OKRs, you've got that data too. Make it as evidence-based as possible. Be open, honest, and objective. Again, a good conversation is always open, it's always honest. Incorporate team-based feedback, so whether that's through 360 feedback processes or something else. Try and get a more holistic view of performance. And you're a manager or you're a HR leader, you can't have your head on a swivel 24 hours a day. You're not going to pick up on everything. So where possible, utilize team feedback, and always be forward-looking. Set goals, set targets, and work out action plans around, right? How are we going to help you achieve that? Where do you need to develop? Where do you need support? What are we going to do? A good 80% of the performance conversation, should be about the current and the future as opposed to the past. So make sure you try to stick to that. So that's a whirlwind tour of traditional reviews versus conversations and why we talk about performance conversations at Weekly10. I'll hand over to Andy now, who's going to show you a little bit of the platform. Sorry, Andy, I think you're muted.
I'm good. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that, Chris. So following on from the insights Chris has just given us in terms of traditional approaches to those reviews, I'm now going to jump into the platform just to show a few of the elements of the platform which support the ability for you to have those more continuous conversations and really focus on performance management as more of a conversation rather than it being a review, as Chris was mentioning. So let's get started. Very brief whistle-stop tour here. There's lots of resources which we'll point you to later for you to get started. If you haven't really explored the templating area of Weekly10, we're just going to give you a quick introduction to that. But do remember that with Weekly10, you obviously have access to your check-ins, and we've recently launched our brand new question setting screens. So as an administrator under organization, if you click on questions, you will be able to access our new questions experience. Here you will have access to the ability to add questions, not only create your own custom question, but also from our question library. And on the topic of today's performance conversations, you will notice there is a performance category with lots of hints from our people scientists as well as to why you may want to use certain questions in certain circumstances. So as we go forward and talk about the templates, it's a really good idea to go in and have a look at the questions that you ask your people regularly and see whether it's time to add maybe a performance slanted question in there, whether it be on every check-in or whether it be something which is dropped in on an occasional basis. Aside from our check-ins, of course, we do have ad hoc feedback within the system as well. So do remember that there is an option for employees to request and send feedback through the system. This feedback can feed through to those one-to-one performance conversations with managers down the road as well. And we'll go into how you can bring that data in very shortly. So check-ins and that ad hoc anytime feedback, a really core part of what Chris has already been talking about today. Now, let's go and take a look at performance conversations and our conversations platform within Weekly10. So to access this, you can either go to the organization tab, click on conversations, or click on conversation templates at the top under the gear icon. For those that are familiar with this screen, just close your ears for half a minute. But the plans area of this screen is very much about how you run a conversation, so it defines when it will be run and who will be able to access that. So when you go into the plan, you'll notice you give it a name, you can select certain departments, select a template, and then you can select whether it runs ad hoc, whether it goes on specific dates, whether it repeats, or whether it triggers on employee start date or the anniversary of an employee joining an organization. We have a few options in there, and those options are growing all of the time. But just to bear in mind that when you do create that plan, you do have quite a few options as to when that template and that workflow will be triggered. The templates themselves are on the templates tab. Again, if you're familiar with this screen, you'll know that you're able to go in here, create templates, and of course, attach them to certain plans so that they can be run. To get started with a template, you simply click Create New Template. You have an option to choose from a number of different types of template. Usually, it will be one of the review options. You can provide a template name. So I'm just going to create one called Example Quarterly Review, for example. We can then choose to start from scratch or choose a template. If you do start from scratch, you'll have basic and custom. We pretty much always recommend using custom. It gives you a lot more flexibility. You don't really lose anything by taking it either. And then once you've done that, simply click Create. This will now allow you to create that workflow. So with your workflow, you're able to create multiple stages. So say, for example, it's a performance review. You're able to have a reflective stage for the employee, a one-to-one or discussion stage with the manager. And if you are using anything like calibration or any subsequent stage, you can also include that. So I'm just going to very quickly add in a couple of stages. The first one's going to be employee reflection. A number of options here as well, allowing you to enable automated reminders and various other things. And then we're going to have a discussion stage, and this will involve the employee and the manager. Okay, so a very simple workflow here is simply 2 stages. You can add notifications, whether they're email or Teams notifications from here as well. And then we can get started with the actual template itself. And I just want to show you some of those elements which can be really good at building those automated reviews, so making sure that actually you're getting as much data in there as possible without employees having to prepare for these conversations, and also giving you that objective data really that managers can use to have those conversations. So let's just create a section called reflection. I'm just going to pop that into both of these stages, and then I'm going to add some of our elements. Now, the elements that we have here is expanding all the time. We have our static elements, so your standard form elements like headings or paragraphs or images. You have static feedback options as well, so just a text field, checkboxes, multiple choice, focus areas, etc. But we also have a wide range of rating scales and automated elements. Now, it's these automated elements I want to focus on today, because these are the elements that allow you to really take what is a standard form into something which really makes an employee and a manager's life both much easier when it comes to do a performance conversation, but also makes it much more effective. So a couple of those things just to point out: we have a goal review, which will bring in the goals from the system, competency reviews, question review, and this is a really great function here is the question review. So if we go in and click on question response summary, for example, we can go in and ask them to reflect on their achievements for the year, and then we can attach it directly to one of those check-in questions. So here we can say, what have you achieved in the last few weeks? Say it's editable by the employee, and this will allow the employee to import data into their performance review with just one click of a button, or a few clicks of a button. There's a few other automated elements as well, so you can get your ad hoc feedback, your recognition, your training to feed through, and you've also got your goal planning as well. So what I would say is, when you're building your conversation templates, think about those automated elements, because what they do is they really allow employees and managers to reflect rather than have to put lots of effort into these conversations, and it will make them much more effective. Now, in reality, what does that look like? So if I just bring up, for example, my Teams instance very quickly, we'll be able to see what that looks like in reality. So once you've built your template, if we go in and have a look at this annual review that we've got here, this has a number of elements of automation. And by having that automation, you'll see that we are able to really produce something which is very reflective and very much allowing employees to take action with their managers. So without any preparation, we've got access to our recognition. We've got a question around what we are proud of achieving this year. Again, I can go in, quickly mark off those responses. So simply checking these automatically includes those in my review. My challenges, again, that's linked back to a regular question. Simply by ticking off the items, they're included in my review. My training, if we've been using this in the system, again, feeds through. I've connected this chart back to a regular question that we have. And then, of course, you can use some of the more traditional elements, so whether it's rating or feedback elements as well. But just having that level of automation, seeing your goals, seeing your feedback in here will reduce the time it takes to have these conversations by about 90%, but will make them much more effective, because they're no longer about preparation. They're now about actually having those conversations and thinking about next steps and actions moving forward. So there's a lot to jump into when you look at performance conversations. There's lots of information on our website, and we'll give you the link shortly for that. But always feel free to reach out to your HR customer success partner, because they have lots of insight into some of the best practices around how to construct those conversations and those workflows. Okay, fantastic. So with that, I will hand back to Chris, and we are going to now run through any Q&A, so any questions that have come through. If you do have any questions that you haven't asked yet, just feel free to pop those into the Q&A, and we will pick those up very shortly.
Cheers, Andy, and thank you for that. So we are coming up to past, so we'll if you've got any questions, get them in, and we'll go through them. To kick us off, we've got three at the moment. So number one, can we move from our existing review templates to using these in Weekly10? So I guess this is about how we take what people are currently doing and add it into Weekly10. So I guess that's the best one for you, Andy.
Yes, so if you've got an existing template that you're not using within Weekly10, so say, for example, you've got it in a Word document or even another system, yes, very simple. Pretty much anything you can do with a form or a standard Word document, you will be able to do with Weekly10. But what we'd recommend is when you bring that across, think about those elements that you can automate. Think about some of those things you can take away as well, because it's all about making this as simple as possible and focusing on the conversation. So anything you can lose, any ratings or any specific things you think can make that conversation more targeted, think about removing those. And again, as I said earlier, feel free to reach out to your HR customer success partner, who can provide you some bespoke advice on that as well.
Great, cheers, Andy. Number two, do we really need an annual review? Do you want to take that on, Andy?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and some organizations have moved purely to continuous feedback and performance conversations through the year. We would say that for most organizations, there is still a place to have an annual or every 6 months have some form of more formal review, but that should be in combination with check-ins on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and preferably one-to-ones. So sit down one-to-ones around about at least once per month. So the real model that we see working is that regular light touch check-in, one-to-ones on a frequent basis, and then a mid-year or annual review. Now, the reason that annual review is important, and this doesn't need to be a big annual review, this is more about a line in the sand for the year and taking that time to reflect. So employees can look back over the last 12 months, look at their achievements, look at their challenges, and then think strategically ahead. Often when we have those conversations through the year, a lot of the conversation will naturally be about tactical elements rather than strategic elements. So it's really important just to take a step back sometimes and look at the bigger picture. And that's what those performance conversations on a 6 monthly or annual basis allow us to do. The key thing is, though, is that they shouldn't take any longer than a normal one-to-one. With all of the automation and with all the data and all those conversations we've already had, they should just be part of what we do, but have a slightly different focus than our regular conversations.
Great. And one from Steve, who asks, are there any resources for me and my team to use when moving away from reviews? That's actually quite a nice lead in, Steve, which is why I left it to last, because unless there's any other questions, what I would say is we have plenty of resources, one of which we are going to send out as part of this follow-up email in the next 24 hours, which is our best practice guide. Now, the best practice guide itself is available on our support website, so that's weekly10.com support. When you land there, there is a whole section dedicated to best practice guides, as well as sort of all sorts of sections around the platform. And these are sort of more high level sort of supporting documents. There's plenty of stuff also on our blog around sort of conversations and why we think performance management needs a rebrand and other bits and pieces. So I will also make sure I copy that, we get that copied into the email for you, as well as obviously we'll send out this deck as well as part of that follow-up email, so you have that as a PDF too. But what I would say is, if you are looking at sort of, trying to reframe your reviews at the moment or moving forward, as Andy said, reach out to your HR customer success partner, or even just drop us an email at support@weekly10.com, and one of the team will pick that up. And we've got plenty of expertise on staff to help you guys out with that. And then that's kind of it for today, guys. Hopefully you found the session really useful. Thank you very much for turning up and listening and partaking. If there are any questions or any follow-ups, then both mine and Andy's email addresses are on screen right now. As I say, we will be in touch in the next 24 hours with some follow-up details too, so you can always respond to us through that as well. But until next time, guys, check out weekly10.com if you've got any other questions, and take it easy, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks a lot.